Welcome to NFTs 360. Today, we're going to take a closer look at what NFTs are, how to get started, and why you should consider pursuing them. We're going to talk about the barriers to entry and whether you can find success with no prior NFT experience. We have an amazing lineup of expert speakers who will provide a well-rounded view of this relatively new technology. So welcome to all of our speakers. How are you all doing? Rasty, Paula, Bruno. It's really good to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking time. Oh, it's wonderful to have you. And I personally find this topic absolutely fascinating, and I have high hopes for NFTs. So I'm excited to talk to you about it. I wondered if one of you, or all of you even, would like to give a quick sort of thumbnail overview of, the elevator pitch for NFTs.
I basically look at NFTs as a new way, a new digital asset class, to monetize, music assets, music IP. I think everyone's looking for, new business models, new distribution channels, above and beyond streaming, what streaming provides, and everyone's exploring and experimenting with, trying to find new ways to do direct to consumer and fan engagement using digital assets.
Thank you.
Yeah, to me, just to give a little bit technical, to me, NFTs are to blockchain to what websites are to internet.
Very good. That's a really interesting perspective. Paula, anything to add to that?
I think it's a combination of what Rasty and Bruno just said. I see NFTs as a technology, just like we've used HTTPS. It's basically the technology behind it. And the way how our company is using it is to actually make music valuable again with the technology that it offers us. So it actually empowers creators again. And that's what I find really interesting about NFTs and the whole environment around it.
I really appreciate that, because one of the things that's distressed me over the past, probably 20 years really, is that we've effectively commoditized music, and suddenly NFTs create scarcity, and that's pretty exciting. So do you have any examples of active use cases that would be helpful for our independent labels and artists?
Well, on our platform, so just to give a little bit of background, so we focus on electronic dance music on our platform, and we're currently inviting artists to join us to create limited edition digital music again. So we've just done our first accounting reporting, and the way how you should see an NFT on our platform is just like back in the day where you would have a box set where you offer an experience again. So instead of it just being an MP3 file that has been available unlimited everywhere, where it lost their value, because basically you can go to any DSP at the moment and click on something a million times and it kind of lost their value. If you just look at the basic economics, the more there is of something, it loses their value. And by adding this scarcity again, where we can now actually say using NFT and blockchain by saying, okay, we're only going to have 100 of this digital file and we're creating an experience around it, because it doesn't have to be just music. We can add video to it, we can add graphical assets to it. So you're creating a little bit, I like to make the comparison just like back in the day where you used to go to a record shop and you would buy a vinyl, it would become a true collector's item. So you also have this closer artist fan engagement on the back of it, because if a fan actually buys your music, they really feel that they're adding something into their collection, something that holds value to them, because it attaches this ownership to it through the blockchain. So those are, I think, two very important elements that we're bringing back into the game that kind of got lost over the past 20 years.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more. Rasty, Bruno, anything to add?
Well, I think Paula summed it up well. Technically, right now, NFTs are just at the very first stage, right? So when people are shaking their heads on others buying JPEGs for a huge amount of money, it might seem funny or ridiculous, but the point is more about what the technology is bringing rather than what is being manifested as such right now. And I think over time we will see, especially with the programmable capabilities of the NFTs, we will see more and more coming out, but also some of the copyright benefits that many wanted to see over the years and were just not able to, right? So for instance, the artist being paid every time that the work moves hands, right? It goes between different collectors, and many other possibilities. Now we will see what the market really becomes developed as. I think this is for now still in a planning and dreaming phase, but I think the first initial examples are pretty interesting, right? And I think it's up to the community to really test out the boundaries of these instead of being prescribed what this should be or what this is.
Yeah, 100%. Bruno, this is an interesting panel, by the way, because you all have pretty different perspectives on this. So I really appreciate that about you. Anything to add to that, Bruno?
I mean, I think I approach it from more from the platform side. We provide a B2B and B2B2C platform. So we want people to be able to understand how to work with their digital assets, not just copyrights, but the use cases I find interesting mostly have to do around access, content, and licensing. Unlocking access to events or proof of attendance kind of models where you go to a show and you scan a QR code and you get some type of content in return. Token gated live streams, or even just exclusive content, whether it's an expansion pack. Obviously you can do that today with Web2. You don't really need an NFT to provide a download link to an exclusive content, but it does create more fan engagement and rewards. And I think that's the interesting part that we want to bring back, create a closer bond between artists and their fans and the people that support them in different ways. I do like a lot of the interesting new use cases around generative and dynamic traits and stuff like that. I think it's still very early for the music, models, around that. I see more use cases in art right now around, generative NFTs and stuff like that. But for myself, I don't really subscribe to royalty payments through the use of non-fungible tokens. I do love composability and programmability. I think that's where it's going to go. And like Rasty said, the community will probably start to explore new ways of doing certain things, and there'll be new business models that can be programmed into the smart contracts. That to me is what I find most interesting.
Thank you. One of the things that fascinates me about this is we hear these great stories about already successful artists selling music or NFTs, music NFTs, music-related NFTs for huge amounts of money. But as I often say, if you're famous, you could sign your dirty underwear and sell it for a huge amount of money. What's interesting to me is whether we can use NFTs to build a career from scratch. Any thoughts on that?
You build an audience, you engage your fans, you build your community. I think DAOs are a perfect example of how you would want to do that. I'm not sure that NFTs themselves is how you build the audience, but you reward people with digital assets.
It's all about active patronage. It's building that community and rewarding your fans that are supporting your music and being closer to them. Because if you look at what's happening in the past 5 years or maybe even 10 years, is that this whole engagement between an artist and a fan has become more and more important as such. A fan does want to be very, very close to the artist, and the fact that they know that the moment that they support their artist, they can be rewarded by something very, very exclusive only makes that engagement bigger between the artist and the fans, which allows you to monitor your community as well at the same time, and at the same time also grow it. Because you've got all the data, the people that are buying your music, if they buy an NFT, you'll know where they come from. So there's a lot of data-driven insight coming to an artist as well. Like if you go to a Beatport or an iTunes, it's great, how many sales you've had, but you don't know where these fans are actually coming from. You might know which country they're coming from. But at this point, you can actually identify your, your biggest supporters and also reward them at the same time. And that whole dynamic, I think that's what is going to become more and more interesting for artists in the future as well. And that's what NFTs are allowing us to do.
So are you suggesting that that you still need to build the fan base via social media, other forms of social media, and even touring, those kinds of methodologies, or do you think it can be done through the NFT platforms, through launching?
For example, the way how we work is we work with packs, and in these packs we've got several artists included in there. So for example, we sell a pack with NFTs, or digital collectibles as we like to refer to them, that can be from a specific genre, or maybe it's rising stars. And so the content partners that we sign, they would be included in a pack, rising stars, and we sell these packs, which could be maybe even 5,000 packs. People buy them. They don't know which artists they're going to get in these packs, which allows for this great discovery model at the same time, because I can get a pack. I can get like rising stars in there. And it's a little bit like your discovery playlist on Spotify, but by then these artists already gained a fan. They've engaged with that artist where they might want to buy more of that specific artist. So it also allows you not to only target your own audience, but to reach a way wider audience. If it actually would result in that artist touring more, I think where we come from is that we kind of want to flip the table. Whereas at the moment, the main income for a lot of artists comes from touring. And I think the whole COVID and the pandemic has showed us that that's also not a sustainable model. Also for up and coming artists, it doesn't work, because if you're not getting noticed and you're not getting the gigs, then you still can't make an income on that. So we kind of want to allow artists to create that much money on the back of their music again, because it's an artisanal product. And the fact that if you go to a Spotify and you get 0.004 cent for a stream, you can't make a sustainable income on that of an artist. And if it basically means that the only way to do that is by touring, we're putting the hands in the Spotifys and the iTunes and Apple Music, where we want artists to actually, by creating these collector's item again, just like again back in the day where you would buy, if you would hold a musical asset of one of your favorite artists, there would be only 1,000 or maybe 100 of those, and the artist would actually be making solid income from that. It means that they can invest in their career at the same time again, and they're not heavily relying on a touring income. So that should make it easier for a rising artist as well to, at a point, if they've got that solid community, that supporting community, even if it's only 100 fans, that they make that much income on the back of it, that they can actually invest in doing more promotional social media. Because at the moment, it's like if you sell your music and you only make very little money, how much can you actually invest in it? And I think we all know that investing is very important to push your career, but at one point, if there's no money coming in, there's also no money to invest. So that's where I like to see it as really a way of empowering these creators, whether you're an up and coming artist or whether you're an already, you have a high profile as an artist and you just want to be more engaged with your community.
Right. No, thank you for that. I mean, in terms of investing in your career, I mean, just staying alive is an investment in your career when you're a young artist, speaking as somebody who went through that route. And it horrifies me that that recordings have become a lost leader for touring and merchandise and sponsorships. I think that's really a negative. Rasty, is there anything that you're seeing work in particular? I mean, is it very limited editions, like 1 or 1,000, or are there any particular techniques that people are using with NFTs that you've seen work?
I think right now we are still at the very, very early stages, and it's not of the early stages of production. So it's not the creators or artist to the audience, it's the audience buying into, right? So we still have
Right.
only a few millions of wallets. We are still in very, very low numbers of penetration of generally in the general market, right? And so currently, I think what is interesting is gaining a knowledge of the systems for the artist and really understanding what can be done and envisioning maybe where this can go. And then waiting for the saturation of the market by bringing your own fans to it, right? It's both what Paula and Bruno were talking about. NFTs don't solve for you discoverability, nor they solve for you community building or any of these tasks. They are still yours to do. You still have to touch people and somehow bring them to it, right? Where the NFTs are very interesting and where the market is kind of getting very interesting is what was already said, which is essentially kind of shortening the path between the artist and the fan, right? Like in any other place, you are at minimum one level separated from the fan, be it through the platform or in many cases by other representation from labels, publishers, and others, right? And so what does work is essentially based on what your audience is like. If you're a very technical savvy audience, one that essentially is very crypto active, then you can, as you said, sign a dirty underwear and do stuff like that. What I saw working really well these days is a combination of physical and digital. So artists making a painting of some sorts, right, in a physical world and giving it with the NFT. So those come hand to hand together. Same goes to music. Essentially, you buy a certain song that entitles you to tickets to a concert or something similar, right? Like access to something that you will have otherwise not gotten. These could have been sold outside of the NFTs, but bringing the people to the NFTs, to the whole blockchain and to the whole market expands then that community and allows for others to tap into it and vice versa, right? So it's a win-win for everybody to bring more people to it rather than essentially kind of waiting for others to do it for you. But there's no recipe yet for this works and this doesn't, and you should do this and in order to, be successful. It's really the kind of the tabula rasa still, and one can really experiment deeply, which, to many may be petrifying, especially to the very young and early artists, but to the ones that are established, these might be very enticing, right? You can really play with things that you have never had access to.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like 1994 again to me, like when, there were, only a few thousand websites and we were just getting started on the World Wide Web, as it were. I'm curious, how do we see these interfacing with other verticals of the recorded music industry? I mean, you just touched on that, Rasty, but do we see, is this going to completely cut out record labels? Is this going to be absolutely just a direct artist to fan play? Or do we think there's going to be a role for record labels and streaming and physical in with the NFTs?
I think record labels are here to stay. They're curators of communities. They're providing access to markets. They provide team coordination. So I don't see that going away. I think digital assets provide a direct-to-consumer participation. I think it's now inevitable and even possible to have direct-to-consumer engagement, outside of the DSPs. And we use digital assets in order to boost those relationships between fans and artists and even create new revenue streams and, new engagement patterns and new rewards and those kind of things.
Excellent, thank you. Can any of you envisage a career built on NFTs that would not include streaming, given that we think that streaming has commoditized music?
But it's a community building, right? So technically, if you look at music as a form of communication and you approach it as a loss leader, which is already done in the current world, right?
Yeah.
Then however you build a community is however you build a community, right? So essentially, yes, I do believe it's possible. I don't think it's going to be easy or easier than if you use all of the tools that are available to you, right? But I think it's technically possible if you target the certain parts of the community, which is the crypto savvy, and you do something within that community that is essentially enticing to it itself, right? You already have, I believe it's 40 million people or so with active wallets, and so you do have some decent heft in that community, and not much being done for it directly. That doesn't mean it's a good idea, right? Like, I think one should definitely use all of the tools rather than some of the tools or one of the tools to essentially extend.
I think streaming is gonna go more to the market where it was actually supposed to be, where it's more like passive consuming. You listen to radio, you listen to your artist on a streaming platform, but the fact that you can use NFTs in the future to actually generate revenue for yourself as an artist, I think it's just a next format. I mean, if we go back 20 years, who would have imagined that that streaming would be the main income at that point? And I even remember when streaming was introduced that people were like, how is this gonna, same as when we introduced digital downloads. I think NFTs and the whole NFT market for musicians is just gonna be a new format that it's gonna take time to actually reach the mass audience and to be accepted as such. I just think there's gonna be a different dynamic in how streaming is going to be used, where it's not going to be so heavily relied on, like, I need to be on streaming because that's where my income is, that's where my community is. And the bigger the NFT audience will grow over the years, the more important it will become. We've seen that with every format, and I think NFT is going to be the future for music. That's the way how I look at it, because it just puts, again, it's that closer artist to fan engagement. It rewards the fans, but it also rewards the creators. And I think it's a way more fairer business model than the streaming model currently allows us.
Yeah, and we know that fans are willing to spend more money than they're being asked to spend right now. And I know we've had a lot of conversations with DSPs about having some sort of additional ability for fans to pass money through to artists, and that hasn't really gone down very well with the DSPs. But it just reminds me a little bit of the fact that people buy vinyl and then never take it out of the shrink rack, right? It's like an artifact that they buy, and it's a sort of a demonstration that they support the artist. And because somebody was saying the other day, it's going to be kind of like what's in your wallet, those kinds of discussions, right? Do you think, I'm curious, what are the kinds of things that are known to motivate people to buy an NFT? Have any of you seen?
Bragging rights.
Yeah. Yeah, I have this NFT.
What's in your wallet? You said it. That's
yeah,
right.
yeah. So curious about
it's
that.
Fandom.
Then.
I mean, it's
right.
pretty much fandom, right? It's just kind of a statement of fandom.
Exactly. It's like, I'm the one who has one out of 1,000 of this, and I've got it in my wallet, and I've got ownership over this. It's that those bragging rights. And I think, I mean, maybe also even the rewards. I think that's also another reason for fans to buy into this NFT, because they have this reward attached to it. Like for example, it could be like, if you've got all these NFTs from this artist, will reward you with this even more legendary or rare experience in real life, where you could meet this artist because you've been supporting us. And I think that's also another objective for fans to actually buy these NFTs. I think we're not there yet, because NFTs are still very new to a lot of the fans, people who've been involved in NFTs and cryptos, who are a little bit more tech savvy. They might get their head around it a little bit more, but the moment that fans actually see that there's all these possibilities to be closer to their artists, to have that fandom where they own something, but they're also going to be closer to that artist, the moment where that kind of drops, I think we'll see a very big shift happening.
That's fascinating. Thank you for that. Is there any evidence emerging right now as to what the optimum sort of edition limited, how limited the edition should be. Should it be 1? Should it be 1,000? Should it no, are there any unlimited NFTs out there?
Not that I know of.
Unlimited NFT is a streaming, right? Like you can
Yeah,
stream.
I guess, yeah.
So that's what the audios is essentially doing, right? It's not an NFT per se the way that you're thinking about it, but it is what it is. I think each of these has different goals, right? Like what Paula was talking about, the rarity, like you want to have a few super fans, right? Like you don't want to have million super fans because that doesn't make much sense, right? So you build different kind of scales and different rules into these, and it's kind of interesting because this is what happened with gaming in last let's call it 20 years, right? So my generation grew up on these where people were laughing. It's like, who is buying all of these skins and who is buying all of these stuff that doesn't have any value to you in the real world? But then you go into World of Warcraft, right? And people spend extreme amounts of money on these things. And so this is truly bringing it to the real world, right? Like to the real life. Like essentially,
right.
When people are dismissing NFTs and then they talk about how they collected baseball cards or stamps,
right.
How is that any different, right? It's like it's a picture on a carton printed out. It's like, how does that have any value, right? Like it's essentially, it's like each generation has its own point, and I think people underestimate how digital the millennials and Gen X is, and how much they are essentially willing to associate value to what is visible online. And you remember, this was the MySpace era, right? Where people had their own page with their own expression and brought other people to it. And it didn't have any value in the physical world, but it became dominant in a certain culture, especially around teenager in the US, right? And so this is not that different from it. And so building atop of this idea that people do find these things valuable, and that it is possible to extend this to larger chunk of the society, then the approach to it is not having again, like the same as you are not supposed to use one tool. I don't think you're supposed to do one thing with that tool, right? Like you don't want to use hammer to bang one nail and that's it, right? Like you don't have a hammer for different nails. Like you literally have hammer for nails, right? So this is kind of that kind of thing. Like for different purposes, you build different structures. So NFTs, what is very interesting about it, it's the programmability, right? The fact that you can build things on top of that. You can compose, you can combine, you can introduce. And I'm actually very excited to see where people take this, right? Like what can be done? Like I get one artist can produce one thing, but what if you collect multiple artists and that does something else, right? And this is not built because one artist says so, nor three came together and done it. It's built because that's just how it's expressed across the network, right? And so I think there's a lot that will be done in the future. And for now, what we are seeing is just really the easiest path, the things that are coming from the physical world for the first time. When in the 90s, every website was essentially a copy of something physical. And then over years, the digital became secluded from the physical, right? Like what you can do in the digital in many cases, you cannot do in the physical. And so I think NFTs are that. It's like for the first time, a native structure for the internet that has no bearing in the physical world. And it will take a little bit of time for us to really find out what does that mean.
Right. Well, sorry, go on.
I'll add a couple more things to that. I think of it, as we went from a physical model of ownership with vinyl and CD, and then we went still to an ownership model with digital downloads, and then streaming introduced, unlimited anything, unlimited listening, and we lost, value with that model of access, right? And we lost wanting to own something. Now we're kind of seeing that come back again. This kind of model of ownership is coming back in the form of digital goods and digital collectibles or digital merch. I think of it as merch, but like Rasty said, it is internet native, a digital asset. So you can take your sword and your hat and your accessories from one game to another. You can take the assets that you own on your wallet that are identified to you, in a non-custodial way, and you can kind of use them across different, web properties. So we'll probably see people start to collect things again, and be able to kind of use those things they collect, across different applications, whether it's gaming, or maybe in the future we'll have more interactive music where you can kind of bring back your Beats headphones, or maybe you'll show up at a concert and you'll have your own accessorized way of identifying yourself, right? Your clothes, your fashion and culture will kind of dominate in forms of digital assets as well.
So now we're both Rasty and you, Bruno, have talked about the metaverse basically, right? So do you want to explain a little more about the metaverse, how that's going to work, and
we're already multi-channel, we're already omni-channel. We spend time on Fortnite, then we go to Instagram, then we go to WhatsApp, then we go to Facebook, then we go to Instagram again, and we just keep moving across these different channels. So we'll see more advancements in technology where when we have a call, we'll see holograms of each other as opposed to being on a video call. We'll be able to actually provide more augmented reality, virtual reality, where we can actually use these digital assets in those games, right? Or in those experiences. You can go to a concert and not be there, and you can feel like you were there, right? And be able to kind of accessorize the way you look, and with your digital glasses and your digital hat and so I think of it very much as kind of our digital avatars, and all these digital assets will just kind of become part of our digital avatars in a way.
So I'm reminded of that article that came out in Wired, I don't know, quite a few years ago now, that said the end of the internet. And they were talking about how, nobody uses the internet anymore. They're really on Facebook, they're on apps. Is there a danger that Web3 is going to wind up being dominated by Facebook or large companies in the way that Web2 has been? Is that?
I think they will try, right? Like, it's their job. It's the job of any corporation to do exactly that. If they will be successful, will be dominated by the incentives, right? What is interesting about blockchain in general, it brought scarcity to a non-scarce environment, while physical is the opposite, right? Like, you cannot bring easy non-scarcity to a scarce environment, right? So what is called now fast fashion, especially in China, where you can get clothes made within 5 days from design, right? That's kind of bringing non-scarcity to a scarce environment, right? Opposite of that is like you have internet where you can copy everything, right? Like the digital, and you can copy everything easily. And so blockchain essentially as an idea brought scarcity to that environment. And now we are seeing, like, for last decade, we just saw these like glimpses of things. Like, NFTs are not yesterday thing. It's actually quite old when it comes to the time of the internet, but all of these small things, these infrastructures are kind of pieces are being put together, and that's what we call a metaverse, right? Like, essentially this idea that you have a website called Facebook, and then you have a website called A2IM. What do they have in common? Well, nothing. They're on the internet. You can open them in the browser, but they have nothing in common. So when you build something on your website, you cannot use it on theirs, and vice versa, right? Like, it's quite secluded. And you see that with games, you see that with music, you see that with everything else. So, like, this was a big thing in music. In fact, let's say it's up from 60s, sampling, right? The idea that you can build on someone else's work. And that's what this allows, right? Like, the fact that you can take an asset from one source and use it in something else is where the opportunity lies. Because if you play games today and you have 3 games that use horses, they're 3 different horses. They behave differently, they feel differently, they are different. But why, right? Like, it's a horse is a horse. Why not to have one that someone spends time building it, and then every game can use it, right? And so the same goes to music and others. Like, you can now work with other assets and cross-pollinate between products. So different platforms can utilize different assets from different products that were made before. And I think that's where this is very interesting. And now that it's essentially all about interoperability, right? And we had that with internet for the first time in the history of humanity, right? Like we truly got interoperable systems between others, right? And we kind of went away with Facebook and others, but they were not successful because they put down some kind of regulation. They were successful because the incentives aligned. So up until Web3 keeps the incentives stay within the network, then there will be no domination, right? And so far, that's what the tokenization is about, right? That's where the DAOs are. That's where all of this exploration is. And I think it will be a shame if we stop today, if the government stepped in and said the DAOs are dangerous because we don't know what can happen or any of that. Because I think we are on the verge of being able to see what can happen when things are really distributed, but the incentives are aligned equally, right?
Right. I think, I mean, you know, obviously, you know, tech companies view achieving monopoly as being the goal, really. So I can't imagine that there's not going to be an attempt to monopolize the metaverse, as it were, and we're already seeing that, I think, with Facebook changing its name. But I'm curious, Paula, I don't know if this is something that you've had to consider, but how do we deal with copyright in the metaverse and with NFTs? Because it's slightly different, right? Am I correct about that?
Well, that's good. I mean, I think the whole copyright, and I think maybe Bruno is the person to actually go into this a little bit deeper. The way how we look at it's still, because it's such a new space, the way how copyright will apply to NFTs, and even the fact that something can be transferred to another person, and what does that do with the copyright? I mean, Bruno, do you want to take this question? Because I think it's a little bit more into your field.
Sure. I mean, I think of digital assets in a way as digital representations of IP on chain, right? They don't replace copyright, you know, but you can monetize, you know, IP. At the end of the day, you know, fraud is fraud and theft is theft. So there will need to be, you know, more and more types of tooling, you know, like what Rasty is building across social media in terms of understanding, you know, illegal usage, utilizations of IP, right?
Right.
And we'll see more and more of those kind of cases being applied to Web3. And there are certain challenges on that as well. Yeah.
Can we defend smart contracts in a court of law at this point?
Not yet, but I did see something recently. I'd have to go back to my notes where there was a precedent on being able to use smart contract as law by a court, which I think is coming. We'll see more and more, you know, use cases of actual, you know, smart contracts being used as precedents for law. Yeah.
Fascinating. Yeah, I mean, it seems inevitable. It seems like we have to get there, but you know, from what I've seen, it's not clear to me that we have a clear path to defending copyright in that domain at this point in time, which is obviously a concern to an organization like A2IM. We're getting close to the end now. Is there anything that any of you would like to add to this? I mean, I'm personally absolutely excited about this. It's not often in a lifetime that these kinds of events happen, and this seems like a really significant event to me. So, but is there anything you would like to add in terms of what each of you thinks is exciting or troubling about NFTs?
I would just say, you know, every 10 years or so, you know, we see changes technologically, and consumer patterns and consumer behavior changes as well. And we're seeing that again right now with blockchain-based distribution of digital assets. I see that as kind of the next distribution model after streaming.
Excellent, thank you. Paula, oh, by the way, Paula, I thought your PAX concept was really interesting, because it sort of reminds me when I was a kid, these sort of compilation albums. I'm Stax used to put them out, and it's how I discovered almost all the artists I wound up loving, because there'd be a couple of well-known artists and a bunch of artists I'd never heard of, and it was a great discovery tool. So that seems very exciting to me.
It's I think Rasty also touched base on it. It's a little bit like your baseball cards, you know. Even it's not something new. We're just taking it into into the digital. It's a digital version of baseball cards, or like you say, the physical compilation CDs, or. And I think that's one of the exciting parts. I mean, if you your question like about NFTs, I think it's very exciting, and that artists and creators or just should be jumping on board with it now, because it's definitely going to be here to stay. Even if it sounds a little bit like, oh, it's a bit scary, I don't know what's happening, but it's an exciting change, and it's a change for the better.
Yeah, thank you. Rasty, any final thoughts?
As I said, we are very early on, and so we'll have to see how this all plays out. I think people should participate as early as possible. Obviously, don't make it your center of the life, but more people participate, faster we discover where this can go and what this can do.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, I've certainly in my life, having delved into a number of new technologies over my career, I find the only way you can really understand them is to actually just dive in and start doing it and make all the mistakes, but make them hopefully inexpensively. So thank you all. Thank you, Rasty. Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Bruno.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate your expertise.
Thanks, Richard.
Thank you. And thank you for being part of our community too. All incredibly valuable to us. And I love hearing your thoughts about all these things. So thank you again.
Thanks for a great discussion and for helping us educate people. Because at the end of the day, we need to educate people about all these digital assets.
We do, and that's a large part of A2IM's raison d'etre, as it were. So thank you for helping us do that.
Pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.